Hello, and welcome to this early access look of Absynth 6 here on Black Goblin Audio. Let me just outline how we're going to approach this video, and if you do want to skip to any particular section, check out the timeline at the bottom where we'll break down each individual part. The way we'll approach this video is first we're going to look at the overall plugin GUI, how we navigate around it. Then we'll look into each individual menu, and then we'll look at some of the functionality and ways that Absynth 6 has finally evolved after the best part of 15 years. So let's begin with a look at the overall macro view of the plugin. We'll start in the top left corner and we'll go from left to right. First off, we have Absynth. If you want details about your particular version of the plugin, we can click here and we see all of those different parameters right here. Your serial key, your version number, and the history of the plugin. And we'll notice here that some of the original creators are even back. Next, between the name and the preset name, we actually have these three little dots, which is another menu for us. This is going to be our preset menu for new preset, open, save, and our scaling for the older of us, like myself. However, the new GUI, as we can see, scaled to 100% here, is really sufficient, which is fantastic. If we've added new presets, or perhaps we've moved our user presets from 5 over to 6, here we can rescan those presets. The next thing we'll see here is our preset title. We've got our navigation of back and forward and a drop down menu of where we are. However, we'll see very shortly that preset navigation is something that has drastically changed and been vastly improved. In this pre-launch version, this doesn't work. However, I believe it is to retain back to our preset view right here. Whereas the next icon is to save our current preset. Moving across here, we can navigate between our main windows of Absynth 6. Our browser, which is our current view, the patch bay, allowing us to sync our oscillators through our channels, through our filters, into our effects, a dedicated effects page, our waveform adjustment page, envelopes, LFOs, and the assign page, what we would most often probably call the mod matrix in most sense. We have our in and outs. Currently loaded here is the stereo version of Absynth. However, this being a cinematic sound design powerhouse, it is available in surround sound as well. And we can see that navigated right here. And as we can see, we have a readout in stereo when we play back. The input would allow us to route a signal into Absynth and run it through its effects. The control here is a gain control for in and out. As we'd expect, we can double click and set our parameters precisely. This button here is a panic control. Say we set a loop or a feedback and we are running drastically out of control. A simple press will automatically stop and reset the plugin. We can click on the NI control and it does the same thing as clicking on Absynth. For the rest of our global parameters, we have our macro controls that remain down the bottom. We have 2 pages. We can click here on the one of 2 to go to the second page. Next, let's look over the browser section. So in Browse, we very obviously have this new interface in front of us, which at the time of me recording this, it hasn't been officially named, but we're going with something like preset map, as it's kind of like a landmass of all the different presets. To build this, Native Instruments have utilized AI to basically create a map or connection of all the different presets and in ways that they sound similar or vastly different. And this gives them this kind of grouping, meaning we can come up here and find this sound. It'll be somewhat similar to the next one. And the next, and the next. They'll all have somewhat of a relationship. We can move over here and suddenly we're in the drum sphere. And it will slowly progress out of that to percussive sounds that are all somewhat related. And this massively steers us away from the one looking through the presets like we have here on the right hand side in the classic order of what they're named, which has never really been ideal, and presets named with an A or numbered numerical values tend to get reached for first because, well, that's the order they come in, or the alternative is to go down to Z. This gives us a whole new way of finding our starting point of a sound. Now we can still narrow this down using the banks and types over on the side here. For example, in types we could go to bass, and we'll now only be displayed those that have a bass tone. And we can see for the most part it's blue, but there are some that are related enough that they're also identified as bass. When we've got a parameter highlighted, it'll be labeled up here. If I go digital bass, and now filters further, and we can see that we have 2 filters in here. Let's be more focused on these digital bass tones now. Pressing the cross, that's going to remove those away. Now, there's even more ways that we can filter this down if we're trying to find the right sound. Considering there are thousands of presets, could be very useful for us. Let's take vocal for an example, as there's not a huge volume of vocal, but still quite a fair amount to go through. If we want something that's long and evolving, that leaves us with slightly fewer. And we can see now we have a filter on types and a filter on characteristics. However, there's a really new innovative way, and that is the sliders right here. And we can use the sliders to get a general feel for the sound that we're maybe after. For example, we can take bright out of the equation, and it will start to remove the landmass of the bright sounds. So if we want dark and aggressive, we can start to take soft out, and we filter those down based on those smart relationships. And when 2 sliders are affected, we can see we have the 2. Let's narrow this down to noisy. And now we've got dark sounds with an aggressive tone that are quite noisy. I'd say that's pretty accurate. If for some reason that you didn't want to be able to hear a quick demo of each sound as you click on it, we can turn the audition feature off here, and they won't play back. If you find a sound that you particularly like, over here on our menu we can add a star to that. And then we can view our starred presets by clicking the star, and it will highlight those ones that we found that we particularly like and gravitate towards. One last thing to talk about in the browser is the Mutator. Now, the Mutator isn't a new feature, it's been there for the best part of 20 years now. And what it allows us to do is mutate a particular sound in an intelligent format. And now it has some dedicated real estate too. So here we can open up the Mutator, and let's take a sound. If we just leave the default settings and hit mutate, we'll somewhat adjust this sound into something new. Here on the right hand side we have a mutation history. We can easily return to the original sound, or to its mutated variant. We can change what Mutate is able to access and change with the parameters just here. So module lock would allow us to lock and not adjust, for example, the oscillators or filters, or the LFOs or envelopes, however we decide. The amount that is applied is, think of it as a percentage. If we get into extreme values, we begin to get extreme changes. Random is the same thing. It's more of a dice roll on the parameters. Retry lets us roll the dice again. But remember, we can always easily return back to our starting point. We We can dial mutation really far back and get very subtle variations. Or if there's something about the particular sound we maybe want to adjust, like just increase its distortion, we can do that. Or perhaps we need it to be a little less bright and a bit more bass heavy. We can dial it in and just use the mutate to bring that closer to what we're after. And this works with any of the sounds across the entire library. Here's Voice of Space. Let's give it a rough mutation and bring that brightness down. So using the browser, we can very quickly navigate to a preset that's somewhat what we're after, and utilizing mutate, we can then dial in those key macro factors to where we want them to be really, really quickly. But for the nitty-gritty sound designer, the patch bay is where it's at, and that's what we're going to look at next. So let's break down the patch view. We can go over to patch right here, and it looks overly complex, but let me assure you, it isn't that complex overall. It's a lot like a mixing desk in that it looks like there's a lot going on, but really it's the same thing multiple times. We can see here we've got channel A, B, and C all labeled. Let's focus on channel A. Once we understand that, B and C are the same thing. First here we've got our oscillator or our sampler or whatever we want it to be. You see, Alchemy can do multiple types of synthesis, sampling, and sound generation. Currently it says sample engine right here, and if we click the down arrow we can see we have single oscillator, double oscillator, FM, rig mod, factualize, and so much more. The way this then operates is like a signal flow. We can turn the oscillator on and off by disabling its signal flow, clicking on here. If we would like channel A, and we're going to refer to this as the oscillator, even though it's a sampler right now, the sound generation source. If we wish that to flow into a filter, we have a filter directly below here. If we don't want it to flow into the filter, we can turn that off and it will bypass straight through. However, when we insert, we're now flowing from our signal flow into our filter and then into whatever's next on our signal flow. So as we may have established, below our oscillator, our sound source, we have a filter. However, we've also got a huge array of different filter types in here as well. And below here, we then have, well, in this case, it's a frequency shift. However, it's a secondary filter. So we have 2 filter modules per channel. And that would allow us to do something like, say, super comb filter distortion from this quite passive sound here. We could go for a super comb, and that would allow us to do something like perhaps add the wave shaper distortion in. And make our sound quite a bit more aggressive. And we can then pass that into, say, a comb filter. Varying our sound wildly. As you can see, this flows down into another set of filters here, but all 3 flow into these 2 filters. So for each channel, we have an oscillator of some description, and then 2 filters that we can enable, disable. Those then all flow into these 2 filters, which again can be bypassed entirely if we need to. And these then flow into a final effects chain. Now below each channel and its respective filters, we do have a volume control and a panning control. So we can take channel B and put everything in a 3D space. It's an XY grid here. We can adjust its overall volume as well. And as you can see, we can put our filters in and out in real time. We get the immediate effect changes as well. Considering the small size of the oscillator window here for the sample engine, we actually have quite a few features. We can take our stereo sample and drop it to mono. Transpose in real time or by sense. Double click to enter exact values. Change the start position of the sample. And even various looping options. Single oscillator functions pretty much as expected. With the functionality here to change our different wave types added below the phase. If we want to quickly phase invert, it's a single click, or we can push the phase to where we like. Meaning it's really easy to create things like distorted saw. Double oscillator gives us the option to do unison. With a detune value. We have FM synthesis oscillator. This FM returns only into itself, but allows us to take something like a saw and modulate it by a saw for those metallic type sounds. Or to create harmonics with a sine wave. Or to create harmonics with a sine wave. If you would like, we can go over the deeper sound design aspects of all of the oscillators in another video. If that's something you would really appreciate, please leave a comment below. Now, while there are multiple effects directly within the patch option here, we have an entire dedicated effects section to look at next. So in our effects window, our main top panel shows us the effect type that we have selected and some of its key parameters. The bottom panel will switch depending on which effect has been selected and will have specific parameters for that effect. We can switch the effects channel on or off, and if we're working in surround mode, surround can be enabled here, but we can still utilize the surround effects in stereo to get the psychoacoustic effect. notice only one effect at a time can be functional. And if we switch, we get the result of that effect. They are not a layer of multi-effects. In the top channel here, we have the input mix, which relates to each channel as seen in the patch. Channel A, B, and C, signal flow can be fed into here. And we can have it so an individual oscillator is only sent to this channel, such as channel B, for example. We then have a wet-dry combination, meaning we could take an individual channel, say channel A, take its dry signal out entirely, and just have the effect. So this allows us to have a signal coming from one of the oscillators and only output the wet effect of that particular signal. The same applies to the aspect of surround. In the secondary window, it's the deeper. In the secondary window, we're able to see the specific of the particular effect selected. These vary depending on what type of effect we're working with, but for the most part are relatively self-explanatory. Let's look at our wave generators. We have a draw mode that allows us to do a singular straight line, but it sets off from any point that we control, allowing us to make saw shapes very, very easily and other distorted digital sounds. The secondary draw mode allows us to draw a little bit more like how we would be used to doing so with cosine type curves. And then we have a control between the loop points of up and down. So we can adjust our loop points to be an incredibly narrow point and bring up or down just in that particular area. Left to right will adjust the curvature. We can adjust the gain and the offset. We also have some advanced transform options like normalize or FM. We can now FM our waveform via itself. Instead of using the filter options, this way we can create our own FM generated waveform immediately. Hit apply, we've now generated that waveform. If we want to utilize the waveform we've created, we can use our drop down here and choose preset 1. We're now utilizing our brand new generated waveform. When selected, we can see where it's assigned. In the full launch of Absynth 6, there should be a number of presets coming with this. We also have a spectrum view to edit. This works much like an additive synthesis, where you can grab the individual harmonics and bring them up and down, or we can draw in directly. Our transform options change here as well, so we can do things like shift harmonics. Or add a slope filter. In the final version of Absynth 6, we should also be able to generate multiple waveform presets and be able to assign them to different locations. such as having one assigned in each channel in the patch. Let's move to the envelope page where we can see an idea of how the wave development might start to look. So here, for example, we can see we've got new envelope, which is currently lacking on the wave page. And we can see a view of multiple envelopes that are displayed here. Something beautiful about the envelopes page and how we can work with them, and this really is a big part of Absynth's flexibility, is if we press a note, we can actually see the transition of each envelope and its release cycle. If we select other oscillators or envelopes, that same story is told. We can hold Shift to select multiple views at once. Let's have a look at how we might work with something here. We're going to go into the patcher and let's take the FM index of our channel A. Because it makes a pretty evident sound, we can right click here and create a new envelope. It will take us straight to the page. It will show us what it's linked to make sure it's all correct. Much like before, if we hit our key, we can see how this performs. Up here we could switch it to an LFO. And now we can see exactly, or hear, FM change. And we can really dive into this LFO and make it build up however we like. We have options like a grid, so we can make sure it's always working perfectly within our grid. We can lock it to it as well. Double clicking will give us more points. In between 2 points, this is to control the curvature between the two. So if we have a large dynamic, we can create a large dynamic change or a sudden sweep up. Then we have our sample and hold point, or our loop point. We could have that on the slope, at the bottom, at the peak. And then I'll release from there. Notice this is still an envelope, just operates as an LFO within the curvature of the envelope. If we turn LFO off, we actually still have the exact same performance just as an envelope. Now it doesn't have the LFO wobble, if you will, creating that kind of tremolo effect, except it's on FM. As you can hear, this lets us create a huge world of sound design possibilities. And that's not even diving particularly deeply into it. Let's look over the LFOs, and to demonstrate them properly, let's reset entirely. Now we're generating just a sine wave. Let's go into our patcher, change it over to a saw, which is a little easier to hear as we lose and gain harmonics. We can change our LFO type. We'll leave it as sine for now, but we can even use our custom generated wavetables if we like. We have a slider for pitch by default. Anything with a drop down here can be changed to a huge number of parameters inside and then assigned to the channels A, B or C, or in the case of the third one here, the master. This can be dependent on what is selected. For example, if we select oscillator main pitch, there is no master option for oscillator main pitch and those disappear. If we were to choose filter frequency, however, and we were to decide that just the master filter frequency of filter 1 and 2 were to be affected, which are this and this, Let's disable 2 and just have 1 in effect. So we have a filter frequency assignment to the LFO 1 to only the master. And there we go. We can invert. We can change the seconds to beat, have it synced with tempo. We could even assign this as an LFO. And we have 3 of these to play with and sync to anything we desire. We could, for example, go into Patch, right click, and go to Modulation Settings. We can see it says Macro Not Assigned. We could assign the transpose here to Macro 1 and give it its depth. A low depth means the full cycle of the macro control would only adjust to a maximum of this depth, whereas this would take it to 100%. So our macro control here now controls the transpose here. We can take something like the resonance of the filter here, right click, go to Modulation Settings. We can also set this to macro, but have it so it only applies ever so slightly. And now both of those things are controlled by the single macro. The assign page shows us these connections, as you see. When we select number 1 here, where we just assigned the transpose and the resonance of the filter, we have those assignments and the visible values of them, meaning we can adjust them easily or remove them entirely. And that has been a complete breakdown of the new Absynth 6. My thoughts for review. As we're reviewing this, this is an unfinished product. However, it has significant updates. Some key things of note are the browser and the way of moving between sounds, and the mutate function, having some real estate that you can work with directly in the preset browser, are absolutely incredible. The fact that all previous Absynth presets will work with Absynth 6 means you have a absolutely huge library to already work with potentially as well. Was the fact that it comes with over 3,000 sounds. Overall, it's an update that brings a synth that hasn't been updated for well over a decade, closer to 2, up into the future and back into the forefront, especially for the sound designers who would make use of a synth like this. It's incredibly versatile, incredibly deep, and something you could lose yourself in for a long time. And it's really great to see it come back in such strengths, with such great sound design functionality and flexibility, all available to us on a nice big screen with a wonderful set of feedback interfaces. Thank you very much for watching the review. If you do have any questions or comments, please do leave them down below, as we would love to hear from you whether you would like to see more content like this. If you would like specific tutorials inside Absynth, that's absolutely something we could do too, and look a little deeper at some of those features without this video becoming 3 to 4 hours long. Thank you again, and please take care.